Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee and of course with me is Milly.
Hi.
We have Sophie.
Hey.
And the special guest who will be interviewing today is Daniel McLellan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So it's amazing to have you here today, especially as part of our Halloween special series to discuss your career and also, Trick or Treat Scooby Doo, which is a very recent Scooby Doo movie, which we all absolutely love. Of course, you've got credits on that as the story writer and also with the teleplay as well. But going back to the start, what inspired you to, or what kind of started you off on your route to become a writer?
Well, I've always been interested since I was a kid. I've always loved movies. I started out, I think, primarily as a fan of movies, and I grew up in Washington State, so well away from Hollywood. And it wasn't until DVDs started coming out when I was in middle school with all the special features and documentaries and commentaries where it kind of clicked for me. It's like, oh yeah, people make these. Like they don't just appear. There's people who go to a place and write a thing and shoot a thing, and then people can watch it later. And so after that, it kind of became a passion and a dream of mine. So I went to film school in Orange County. I originally did editing work, post-production. And then after college, I kind of shifted over into writing. So kind of a long journey from when I first set out to be a writer to getting my first job. Various kind of assistant work and got a kind of feel for every part of the industry. I did development, post-production, sound, and it was kind of a nice like crash course in all parts of it before I settled on writing being what I wanted to do. And I got my start on a ABC network mystery horror show called The Whispers, which was a pretty fun but short-lived little kind of dark mystery crime thriller based off the works of Ray Bradbury. And after that, I met my boss, the late great Zach Estrin, who I worked with as a personal assistant before he brought me onto Lost in Space, where he gave me my first writing job. And then after that, it's just sort of been off to the races.
Wow, amazing. And this certainly is an exciting career that we're looking forward to getting into more. And also, it's great to hear that there's some people out there that appreciate the behind the scenes bits as much as we do, because we certainly make a point of going through those as and when there's DVDs that feature them. I know you said you've been a big fan of movies from quite an early age. Do you think there's any either movies or writers that inspired you to go down this path?
I think probably the filmmaker that was most inspirational to me when I was growing up was probably Sam Raimi. I think the Evil Dead films, Army of Darkness, Darkman, kind of his early genre work, really kind of struck a nerve in terms of, what I find interesting or fun or funny. And then as I grew older, I kind of started expanding out what I watched more of. I think the Coen brothers were a pretty big influence. And then as an adult, I think David Lynch is someone that I respond to a lot. Um, his work, as well as I like actually. I don't think I would ever do anything like his work in terms of its social importance and kind of topicality. But I'm a big Spike Lee fan, just as like a fan of films. He's someone I think who I like how he kind of has a real world, one foot in the real world and one foot in sort of the theatricality of film, and he kind of takes big swings. So those are people who I find to be pretty inspiring.
Awesome. What would your advice be to aspiring writers watching this?
Yeah, I I think when you're if you're very young starting out, before you're looking to get a job, when you're just sort of following a passion, when you watch stuff, really pay attention to what you like about it, kind of drill down. I think sometimes when you're young, it's like, I like this or I don't like this. And I think it's kind of helpful if you want to be a writer to really think about what is it about this that I like? What is it about the story that I responded to? What do I think could have done better? What would have been done better? And that was very helpful to me because I think it's very easy early on to just want to emulate people you like or just kind of, mimic their style as a fan. But I think if you start picking apart in a fun way, like I like to do it positively generally. I think it's best to like, what do I like? What do I want? If I was to do something, what would I want to do that could be similar to this? then you can start piecing together. It also helps you figure out your own interest and voice. I think as fans of stuff, it's good to know, what do you like. It's fun to follow a passion. It's fun to really figure out what you're into specifically. I think once you find a passion, it's fun, even if you don't pursue it as a career, to just have a passion. And then when you are starting to try to do it as a career or to get work, I think the biggest thing I would recommend is to just do as much as possible, as fast as possible. The best way to learn as a writer is to finish something and then take a look at it when it's done and see how you feel about it and what you could do differently. I think there's much more value in finishing large amounts of work than to spend a very long time on one piece. I think I wrote, probably maybe a dozen scripts of varying levels of quality before I felt like I had something that I could show to someone to try to get me work. And I think sometimes I can see younger writers really pouring everything into their first script, which is great. But you're going, if you want to do this as a job, I think a lot of what you're going to be doing is writing a lot of things and having to apply that same passion to a lot of projects for a lot of different people on a lot of different topics. And so not getting too hung up in like the one script that will, change everything. It is kind of a journey being a writer. It's not so much about writing one thing that then catapults you into the stratosphere, which does happen. I mean, and if it does happen, great. But if not, it's good to just kind of keep working.
Absolutely, and we're definitely very glad that your work has found its way to us, especially because it's probably evident from the background, but we absolutely love Scooby Doo over here. It's an absolutely incredible franchise that has stayed with us for such a long time, and so I'm curious to know, at what point or how did your work on Trick or Treat Scooby Doo, come about?
The very first thing was my agent sent me an email asking if I was a fan of Scooby Doo, and I said I am. I am a very big fan of Scooby Doo. There are undoubtedly bigger fans, but it was something that I grew up watching quite a bit of. I think my primary, Scooby Doo was the original cartoon, a pup named Scooby Doo, and then specifically the Zombie Island film, which I think is a lot of people's kind of intro. It was sort of a reboot of sorts. I'm not gonna, you know more about Scooby Doo than me, almost certainly, but for me, those were sort of the three big, tiers of my Scooby Doo fandom. And I kind of count the original cartoons as everything. When I was growing up, they would sort of mix and match what episodes you were getting. It's like, so you'd get a Guess Who Scooby Doo or a Scrappy Doo or a new Scooby Doo movie, and it wouldn't necessarily always be labeled as such. So pretty much anything before 1980, I kind of lump in as the original run, even though I know that's not technically correct. But that's sort of my basis of where my Scooby Doo fandom comes from. And I got reached out to asking if I was a fan, if I wanted to meet on the project, because Warner Brothers Animation was looking for, new pitches on how to address, like how to develop a new Scooby Doo with people that they hadn't necessarily worked with before. They were open to meeting new people, and it was just really exciting for me. I just said yes, and I quickly watched a bunch of Scooby Doo content, both that I'd seen before and some that I hadn't caught up on, especially some of the more recent stuff, to see where they were at and what they were, what they'd been working on. And then I just poured kind of everything I had into this pitch document, and I just kind of bullied them into letting me do it. Because I was just like, hey, I'm the person to do this. I promise you, no one's going to come in with more love and passion, really wanting this to be something special. I really felt it felt like something I was very lucky to work on. I think it's a very beloved character with a long history, and there's been a lot of stuff made with Scooby Doo, so that's sort of a little bit daunting at first when you're kind of trying to bring something new but also pleasing to the fans. That's hard when there's a lot of material, because there's always the great, unless you've memorized every piece of Scooby material, there's always going to be that great idea you have that someone's going to be like, well, actually, in this one episode in the spin-off in the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, they did this idea. So I just really kind of approached it from what I felt like a Scooby-Doo story I would specifically want to tell, what I would get excited about, what the franchise meant to me, and hoped that other people would also want to see that.
See, I love that because it is so evident how much knowledge and experience there was with the classic series when watching Trick or Treat Scooby Doo, you know, from harkening back to some of the classic monsters and even the way it was all presented. I think it's all very classic. And I know you mentioned that when you were signing on to the project, you'd watch some of the more recent stuff. Do you recall what that more recent stuff entailed or what you picked out from that in particular that you'd want to bring to Trick or Treat Scooby Doo?
I think from what I had seen of the more recent stuff, it felt like there was, whenever I felt like someone had a specific specific thing they wanted to say about the characters or a particular passion project, I felt like the projects were a little bit more successful. And then sometimes when it felt maybe like there was less investment, they were a little bit less successful. Although I will say that there's a pretty good, compared to anything that has this much stuff on it, I think Scooby Doo has a very good quality ratio. Like I think a lot of the stuff, even, you know, I'm probably less critical than some of the maybe really invested fan base, but I think quite a bit of it's pretty good. And some of it, you know, like, yeah, everything there's occasional duds here and there, but overall, compared to most things that have this many movies and TV shows and episodes, I'm very impressed with the amount of, you know, care that's been taken with the franchise. So that was another reason it was appealing to work on. It's because it wasn't like I was coming into something that was broken, you know. Like I wanted to try to apply my own personal stamp to it, but my pitch wasn't like, you know, these are no good, I'm going to fix it. I came in as a fan, including, you know, of the stuff they've been doing. I just wanted to try to, you know, take the torch and see what I could do and see if there was something that I could say that hadn't been said yet or hadn't been said recently, at least.
See, I must admit, I love that, as you've said, the first question was, are you a fan of Scooby Doo? Because there's something about how this movie feels in terms of nostalgia and just heartwarmingness as well, that it almost feels like it was made by fans for fans, and it had so many elements that we all wanted, needed, and I think for a lot of us it was one of the best movies we've seen, certainly in the last 10 years for Scooby Doo. So
thank you.
there's so many things that we absolutely loved about it. I know, like you said, you are a fan, so was there a particular character that you were excited to get into and start writing about?
I think, you know, clearly from the movie, I think Velma is someone that I was interested in kind of telling a story with. She was a character that I definitely had a deep kind of like, I want to do this. That was like one of my big, you know, things in my pitch was like, I want to tell this story with Velma. So that was important to me. And then I actually was pretty keen to try, like, instead of one character, I think a big goal I had was to try to give everyone something to do of equal weight and value and give everyone a little character journey, which I don't think they all need to do. That's sort of something that I think was specifically my take, not necessarily like the correct take, if that makes sense. I think sometimes it's fun to not have a movie where everyone needs to have an emotional arc. You know, sometimes it's just there's a comic relief character who can kind of lighten the mood and kind of keep the comedy flowing. But I think I really wanted to try to share the wealth and try to give everyone something that felt like they had either gone through some sort of emotional journey or had, even if it wasn't emotional, a little bit of a story. You know, Scooby's might be the lightest just in terms of his, you know, relationship with the cat, and that's like just a fun story, but there was sort of a hope of doing that. That was a big goal of mine, was to try to make everyone, if anyone was a fan of any character, they would have something in there that they could focus in on, whereas focus was kind of Velma.
That's amazing to hear. Alongside the interviews, we do also review the series and the movies, and it was kind of unanimously agreed that it was one of the best Velma interpretations we'd seen in a very long time. So that all makes a little bit more sense now as well. And you were credited alongside Laura Pollock and Audi Harrison. So in terms of the writing duties, how were things divided up?
Great. Yeah. Yeah, they were great. They're great partners. And so the project, I was the writer on the project through the story outline and the first two drafts. And then Audi's the director. He was hired, and he was working concurrently on Haunted High Rise with Laura. And then when they went into production, they continued on with both of those, with Laura sort of serving as the production rewrite draft person with Audi on both projects. So I was up through them beginning production, and then they carried the ball from production. And so it was a very collaborative effort. I think that, like, you know, in terms of the additions that I felt like they really, like, Trevor was their invention. I thought Trevor was very fun, like a really great, fun new character. And they also had to combine, like, they had to do a little bit of condensing in production, just because eventually, you know, when you make something, you have to make changes to accommodate the running time or the amount of, you know, characters that you can have a budget to design. So a little bit of behind the scenes. Originally, Coco Diablo was two separate characters, a daughter and a father. And they combined, and originally my character's name was like Bex Barker, and there was Esmond Barker, and they were two kind of, you know, they basically, both of their characters got consolidated into Coco Diablo. That was like a big production change. And I was really happy with it. It was a nice kind of efficiency thing. It's the kind of thing that, you know, you always hope as a writer, when your thing's actually getting made, that the people who are in charge of taking your words on the page and making sure that they get onto the screen on budget, you know, you hope that it's done with care. And I really feel like Audie and Laura did a really great job with that. So I was very happy for them to kind of take it across the finish line.
In the early stages, did you know that Trick or Treat would be, you know, somewhat in the Scooby Doo and Guess Who art style?
No, but I certainly hoped it would be. That was like one of those things that's not in your control, you know, like it's out of your hands. And when they were, I mean, either behind the scenes or after I was done, they kind of went with a new animation group who'd done, you know, work on the show, and I think they did an amazing job, and I'm so happy that that's what it looked like. I think it fit the story perfectly. I could not have been more thrilled with the look. It certainly was written to be reminiscent of the older show. It was meant to be kind of a timeless, you know, look, and not really lean into modern animation styles. So when they kind of did the I think it's like elevated vintage, or almost, I don't know how to describe it. It's just like the old style, but with more fluidity and sort of expressiveness. And I think a lot of, if you look at some of Audie's work on like Uncle Grandpa, and I think he did a really good job with some of the expression work and the animation fluidity. So I was very, very happy with how it turned out.
I mean, I think we all agreed in the fandom, like, this movie was a real turning point, like a real triumph in the Scooby, all the movies we've had previously. Was the story always planned to be what it was in the movie, or was there any other concept spoken about at the time?
The story was always this same. The main story, you know, in terms of the gang discovering that there was a mastermind behind the costumes, and then dealing with the ghouls like Count Nefario and his group. That was always the core story. The main ideas that were kind of bandied about were some of the characters had different character arcs that just there wasn't enough time in the movie for. Shaggy, a more complex story with his you know, father at one point, and Fred had kind of a more fleshed out crisis of conscience, and I mean, crisis of confidence, not conscience. So that stuff was not necessarily jettisoned because nobody liked it. It's just at some point you need to start picking and choosing what you want to focus on, because if there's too many ideas, none of them will be serviced. And I think ultimately it felt it was best to kind of really focus in on the new team up, kind of the new character, and the new focus on like Coco Diablo, and kind of that dynamic, I think was sort of the thing that felt like, you know, what's the core idea that we really want people to take away from this. So there weren't necessarily any like large shifts to the core story.
That makes a lot of sense, and it would have been almost really cool to see an alternate take where, of course, Coco was part of, two characters instead, and Shaggy did have that relationship with his father. I think, I'm so intrigued by that. I almost would like to hop into an alternate reality and see that version as well, because without a doubt, the time limitations can probably be a real thing. I can only imagine how complicated that can get. But also as well, it's quite a seasonal film with it being set at Halloween. Did this add any, limitations at all, or was it more of the fact that, any Scooby Doo in theory could be a Halloween special?
No, I mean, I think, you know, honestly, Warner Brothers is really good about listening to the fans, and reacting, and Warner Brothers Animation, I'll say specifically. So Happy Halloween Scooby Doo was quite well received by both fans and in terms of, just how it did as a special in terms of its sales. And so I think they'd been looking, because these things were made so far ahead, there was actually a few in the hopper before, even though I was writing, like I got hired to start right when Happy Halloween Scooby Doo came out. So I think there was still A Sword in the Scoob and Courage the Cowardly Dog before mine came out. I think those were the two between ours. And they had been already looking to kind of try to do another Halloween one just because it had been so well received. And because my story involved masks and costumes, it felt like it was the way it was a good one to incorporate it because it didn't change the story. It added a nice flair, and basically it helped with like a third act climax, because you could do it on trick-or-treating and Halloween night, which was a nice use of the costume kind of motif. So it was pretty organic, and they took a light touch, even though I think they definitely wanted it to be set at Halloween. My partners at Warner Brothers were very good about, making sure it fit the story.
100%, because I do love that how now on Halloween we can put so many, Scooby-Doo movies in the bowl. We can do Goblin King one week, Trick or Treat the next week, and then, Happy Halloween. There's just so many specials that we've been treated to when it comes to Halloween and Scooby-Doo. But I think generally speaking now, do you think that there's a particular formula or aspect that needs to be within a movie to make it Halloweeny as such?
Only what my opinion would be. Not that that's any more valid than anyone else's opinion, but I personally think that if you're going to set something as Halloween, it's okay to go like a little scarier. I think the Nefario and his gang were designed to be like maybe on the upper edge of a still, younger audience appropriate Scooby Doo. Just because once you're buying into Halloween, you're buying into a fan base that likes to be a little scared or likes to be pushed, even with younger audiences. I think you want to do it responsibly, and not create something which is overly scary or kind of shuts out large portions of the audience. But I feel like when you're doing a Halloween special, you should try to push it as far as you can and kind of just talk with people and make sure it's hitting that right balance.
And I think a key factor that we really want to talk about with Trick or Treat Scooby Doo is, not just was it an incredible interpretation of the main gang, but also the characters that were introduced new for this movie, one of which quickly cemented themselves as a fan favorite, which is Coco Diablo. I know we'd started to talk about her briefly, and you did say that it was two characters that was kind of merged into one. Do you remember what the story was like from, getting from that initial conversation of having two characters to getting to the Coco Diablo we saw on the screen?
Yeah, so just in terms of the main differences, it really was kind of a mashup of the two characters. The father was a vain, sort of self-centered designer of these costumes, and the daughter was a somewhat resentful child, not child. She was kind of Coco's age, who had felt a little bit ignored by her father in terms of his goals for trying to beat the Scooby Gang, and sort of still had a nice little romantic subplot with Velma. And I think when they combined them, they essentially took the romantic, cool girl, cool woman vibes from the daughter, and then added the vanity and sort of the flair for the theatrical and obsession with, you know, defeating the gang. And I think it really created a really fun character. So the both parts were there. I think the main difference was there was kind of a bigger subplot with, you know, the prison. You know, it was more of a having to work with the criminal father while the daughter was kind of annoyed that you know, he was getting another pass. So just a simplification of the two beats, but I was very happy with the combo because I feel like all the main things I wanted to get across were very elegantly blended.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm certainly happy the two were blended together because I imagine that meant that we got more time with just Coco themselves, and certainly that's a character that a lot of people have said they would really like to see return. Is there, I appreciate the character went through, you know, a huge transformation and they went from two characters to one. At any stage in the writing process, did you have a clear concept of this is what the character's going to look like, or did you know who was going to voice them or anything like that?
No, usually in terms of design, you know, I think obviously I wrote in my character descriptions in terms of telling the story, but a lot of the design work and voice work is going to be done by the director and the producers later on, you know, primarily the director's call. So I think while I sort of give my take, I think as a writer, you need to be flexible for kind of how you envision it. And sort of the heart of the core of the character stays the same, which I felt like they did. So in terms of, you know, the design and the voice work, that would have been kind of more of a directorial decision in terms of like how they ended up there. I was just happy that they kept her self-centered. That was my favorite aspect of the characters, was just sort of the theatrical vanity. I thought was funny.
We touched on it briefly, but Trick or Treat was notable for Coco being the love interest with Velma. What led to this decision, and what was it like to explore them themes?
I felt like it was a decision that had already sort of been half made. You know, it didn't feel like I was saying anything new or controversial or groundbreaking. It just felt like it had never been sort of explicitly built into a story. And I think my one thing is I just kind of didn't want to be coy about it. It was such a, you know, it's mostly a comedy story. You know, it's an innocent comedy crush story about someone who's awkward around someone they think is cute. And so that's the story. And we've seen that story with Daphne or Fred or Shaggy even like a million times. And at some point when you're like, when Shaggy's had a love story before Velma's had a love story, like based off of, you know, I mean, Velma's had love stories, obviously, but in terms of a lot of fandoms, theories, and conceptions about Velma, I think I just felt it was time, you know, felt like I have friends in my life who would love to see, you know, kind of a queer role model in a movie like this that would be meaningful to them and their you know, their kids. And that was sort of I had in the back of my mind. It just felt like, it felt like something that was, it didn't hurt to put it out there. And Warner Brothers was extremely supportive and never questioned it. And it was just in from day one. So in from day one, and they never noted it down. So I was very, very, felt very supported and very happy with how it turned out. And I hope other people.
I think we all agree how it was done. It was like perfect.
Yeah.
One of our favourite parts of the movie, we got to look back at the classic villains via Coco. How did you decide which villains to call back to, and were there any that were discussed that didn't make it?
I don't know if there were any that were seriously discussed that didn't make it in. I think basically because there's so much Scooby Doo, and each movie or TV show needs to cater to people who are new to the franchise and also people who are casual fans and also the people who are diehard fans. There's sort of a wide spread of built-in knowledge, you know? And so I think the main things I was looking for was instantly recognizable as a Scooby Doo villain, even if you weren't a huge Scooby Doo fan. And I think that's, you know, essentially the Black Knight, the characters that have probably also been in the live action movies are still featured on art, on the toys, when you'll see it at like a Rite Aid, or, you know, like when you see in the stores, these are kind of the villains that are famed. And then also, once you kind of narrow down that pool, making sure that none of them are too similar to each other. You know, you kind of want each of the characters to have something interesting to do at the end that doesn't feel too similar to another character. Um, so that was sort of the main impetus, and to make Scooby a cat. That was sort of the the big requirements. And trying as much as possible to honor stuff that's been done before. Like it's hard with a story like this. Like, you're aware that you're risking like a minor continuity error, like maybe this kind of mildly contradicts. It's a little bit of, you know, a retcon of some of the stories, you know, from the past, in terms of it's going to be hard to do a story like this and have all the pieces line up perfectly. So also trying to tell it in a way that doesn't invalidate the stories with these characters in the past, or at least, you know, is mild enough of a shift that everyone can still enjoy it all. I think it can be really easy to get really caught up in, you know, well, you know, in this line in this episode, this character very clearly said they sewed the costume themselves, and those are kind of like the suspension of disbelief as a writer. You ask because you think this could be a fun story, especially when something has been going on. Or it's a little bit like James Bond, you know, like James Bond. Is it one character? Are they all reboots? Sometimes, like, you know, Judi Dench is M in the reboot, and then in the Pierce Brosnan ones. I think the more you can have more fun with the stories and the characters if you're willing to kind of go with maybe a couple bumps here and there in the service of telling a fun story.
Oh yeah, like being, I guess, being primarily from the UK and stuff, I always compare it so much to like Doctor Who. Every couple of times or so, you know, there's a rush of light and there's a whole different, you know, set of cards to be dealing with. So that absolutely does make sense, and I do like what Trick or Treat Scooby Doo adds. And also, we've kind of alluded to this. There's been some sections that you mentioned, for example, Shaggy interacting with his dad, and also Fred having a little bit of crisis of identity and confidence. So, in terms of those sequences that were proposed, can you tell us more about those, please, and how they would have fit into the overall story?
I mean, Shaggy's was kind of a fully removed subplot, I would say. So there was like a full story there. But I mean, you know, the movie's at length, and I feel like it doesn't feel like it's missing anything. So it's just one of those decisions you have to make at some point, and just trim it down. You know, they were fun, and maybe I won't get too specific in case I want to use them again at some point. I think that's the great thing about Scooby Doo is, you know, the ideas can come back. The only big set piece, which I think didn't fit in the movie, just called ultimately we went a different way, is that at various points there was sort of a big Halloween race, kind of like a town, you know, drag race thing. And it felt like it was an idea from before the Halloween idea came on. And it didn't feel like it fit as comfortably in the story once Halloween became the theme, just because I think racing and Halloween aren't necessarily intertwined. And switching over to sort of the evil mystery machine concept, it felt like too many car ideas. And so I've always been a big fan of you know, wacky races and Speed Racer, and so I'd kind of had a dream of doing something like a kind of an exciting ghost car sequence. So that's one of maybe the only major sequence that was cut, that I think would have been kind of fun in a different movie, maybe.
Yeah, I'd love to see some type of evil car storyline, because we had one in What's New Scooby Doo, but to see almost like a family-friendly version of, you know, Christine by Stephen King, like into Scooby Doo, I think that would be a really cool story to explore.
Yeah, the mystery machine's such an important part of the vibe that it feels like there's always something kind of car related. And you know, they did Curse of the Speed Demon and stuff, and so they've done car stuff before. So it's not necessarily like an idea that they haven't explored. It's just something that I thought was kind of fun. Big fan of the Fast and Furious movies, so I was just trying to get references in there.
Yeah, that's incredible. I was actually just speaking about like trying to come up with some concepts for a crossover that they could do. So that'd be really, really cool. Do you have a favorite scene from Trick or Treat Scooby Doo at all?
Favorite scene? I think probably the sequence that I enjoyed working on the most the whole way through is I think the library sequence and all its permutations. When the ghosts attack them at the library and Velma's trying to flirt with um Coco and back, like all that stuff. I think that was and you kind of learn the history of the ghouls. Um that stuff I think was fun for me to write. It was a lot of fun gags, and I think I was happy with how it came out as well.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the standout sequences, and as well the fact that they got Ballroom Blitz to be kind of the motif leading into that, I think was actually
Yeah,
really cool.
it was a good, like a very, inspired music choice, I thought.
Mhm. And I know you said that Audi and Laura went on to work on Haunted Highways. I think they also got, was it Aaron Preacher we spoke to, who was a writer on that as well. Did you
Oh,
have any
great.
involvement with Haunted Highways at all?
No, I didn't, and that was kind of a concurrent movie, and I would have just loved to see it just as much as you all. So I'm not sure. I'm not qualified to comment on how those things work, but I hope that there's some path to some of the ideas from that coming. As someone who's made a lot of stuff, I think it's always hard when something you work on doesn't necessarily get to see the light of day. So I'm hoping that can either come back around, or some other version of it can exist, and all the good people who worked on that can have their story seen. But yeah, I was not aware. I did not read the script, or was not aware of it, other than the tantalizing hints that I've heard as well as from you as well.
See, I must admit, when you said that there was a couple of elements of Trick or Treat that you weren't going to go into too much in case they included them in another movie that hadn't made it into this one, I was also kind of going straight to that mindset of, yeah, so ideas can come back around and hopefully we can see something like Haunted Highway. So instantly, that's where my brain went, and it's something that we would certainly love to see in the future. But this interview will be going out on the build up to Halloween. So kind of moving on to a slightly different topic, which is there 3 kind of, I don't know, spooky movies that you would recommend people watching at this time of year, or spooky movies that you always just find fun to go back to?
Yeah, I think I'll keep it family friendly for this interview, just so everyone can enjoy them. I think 3 that I find to be kind of a good rounded classics is I like Bride of Frankenstein, although maybe Frankenstein's better to watch first, but I really like the movie Bride of Frankenstein. I think it has great mood and character, and it's really empathetic view of the monster in a way that is kind of emotionally still stands to the test of time. And then I'm a big fan of Gremlins. I got my Joe Dante signed movie here. It's one of my favorites. And I think that's a really good balance of, even though it's set at Christmas, I think that's a good balance of kind of pushing a family scary movie about as far as it can go, just letting kind of people who like being spooked out or grossed out have a little bit more of a kind of an intense experience. And then I kind of am going to go with a mystery, just because I think a lot of, I think Scooby Doo is also primarily mystery, not just horror. I think trying to build a fun, twisty, turny mystery with a variety of interesting characters and red herrings is great. So I read the movie Clue from the 80s. I think is a fun one, kind of a good, reminder of how you can have fun with the mystery format and do it with primarily comedic characters, which I think is one of Scooby's strengths. Good mysteries done with comedy characters.
They certainly are some incredible movies, and it was amazing to see the Gremlins DVD. I know that's a movie that JayBee always calls back to and tries to fit into both his Halloween and Christmas playlist, so it's certainly one that we see a couple of times around this time
the
of year.
Joe Dante autograph was like, my brain exploded. It
Oh.
was incredible.
So I will admit that's getting towards the end of the questions that we have and starting to kind of turn to look at the future. I know we're all hoping, I think I can speak for the entire community when I say that we see another Scooby Doo project in your future, but for the time being, is there anything that you are working on that you're able to share with us?
today is the first day that we're off strike. So we've been on strike for 5 months over here. And so honestly, it's just reaching out and not essentially starting from square one, but just sort of, emailing people and being like, hey, what you been up to? And kind of getting those. So it's an exciting time, but also not necessarily anything specific. I'd certainly love to do something involved with Scooby in the future. So I'm sure I'll talk to Warner Brothers and see what they're up to. Because I love the character. I think I have more stories I want to tell with Scooby. I'll put it that way. So
I can't begin to tell you what good news that is for all of us. Honestly, we really hope that something does come from that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, definitely an exciting future. Where is the best place for people to keep up with your work?
I'm not really on any form of social media for work or anything. So I guess Google. Google.com. If you liked Scooby Doo and you want to see some other stuff I did, the reboot of Lost in Space is on Netflix. I'm very proud of that show. I worked on it for all 3 years, and it's sort of a similar, maybe a little bit more intense, but like a good family show, fun action adventure with good characters and a lot of heart. So I'll proudly plug that as another thing that if you're unfamiliar with that and you like Scooby, give it a shot.
That's incredible. I'll be sure to recommend that out there and even give it a watch ourselves, because that definitely sounds like stuff that we'd be interested in. But yeah, that does conclude all of the questions that we had for you today. Just thank you so much again for the time you've given us and for joining, because it's been amazing to hear about your career and also Trick or Treat Scooby Doo.
Thank you so much. It was really a delight, and I hope to do it again sometime. I hope you have a fun October lined up. I feel like this is probably just like the season.
Yeah, it's like literally spooky season in the element, especially for Scooby fans. So thank you so much for joining, and of course thank you so much to everyone for watching and supporting. It really does mean a lot. All of our social links will be in the description down below, so if you do want to see more, then please like, comment and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.